All right, my name is Matt McGivney, and I will be here today coding a WordPress plugin. Live streaming this for the first time, trying out something new here, just to see if it is something that I could do and continue to do. I had some technical troubles getting set up. I've tried to start this a couple times and couldn't get the audio working, couldn't get the video working, but anyway, I think we're good to go now, and I will start. If you don't know much about WordPress, it's an open source content management system. Just means that you can set it up on your web host or on your web server and very easily publish content for the web. In fact, their mission is to democratize publishing, which is a mission I really like to get behind because it allows the average person who's not a web designer or web developer to put stuff out there on the web. So I started coding for WordPress back in 2013 after spending a lot of time in college studying computer science and programming in Java and C++ and things like that. But here I am today. I've been a freelance and full-time WordPress developer for going on 2 years now. And this live coding session today will be me working on a plugin for a client for their website. So before I actually get into my code editor, I wanted to just talk a little bit about what I'll be doing. And I do have about a half an hour today. I was going to try to go for an hour, but maybe a half hour will be better for this first time just to see how things go and see what the reception of this is. So yeah, without further ado, what we'll be working on today is for one of my clients. They're a company called Home to Heaven based here in Colorado. And one part of their website in particular needs to be updated and modernized a little bit. And that is this area here, what they like to call the honored stories. You can see it kind of highlighted here. So when you click on this link on their website, it takes you to a place that you can see all of their past clients' pets. And what this company does is they provide euthanasia services for pets. So when a pet is too sick or suffering too much, they make house calls and they go out to their clients' houses to help them help the pets pass on. And what they allow those clients to do after the appointment is come to the website and submit a picture and a story about the pet. And that's what these honored stories are. So each one of these is a past client who has now passed on. And you can just click on a pet's image and it brings up the user submitted image as well as the text that the user submitted. And they have over, I want to say around 1,500 of these. You see there are a bunch of pages of the stories that have been submitted in the past. And each one of them is unique. And how these all got here on the website, for the most part, is through a form where you submit a memorial. So I'll click on that here to show you what that looks like. So here you see just a few fields like the pet owner's name, their address, the pet's name, the image. You can upload a file from your computer, and story, so a big text field where you can kind of enter the story. And then we have, of course, a CAPTCHA down here to try to deter spammers. And then they just click submit. After that, the memorial will go into moderation, which means someone at the Home to Heaven organization, one of their staff, has to go into an admin area and approve it. So this is the form that I will start recreating today. And I'm actually going to start on the server side, so on what we call the back end, and just make sure that I have form fields, yes, but that when they go into WordPress that they're stored correctly. So later we'll get into styling this same form and making it look great on the front end, but today I'm going to build out those building blocks to make sure that everything works on the server the way it's supposed to. So I think that's a good discussion of what we'll be setting out to accomplish. Now let's talk a little bit about how I'm going to do this. So there is a project called CMB2. You can find it here on GitHub. I can try to post this link if that would be helpful. And what this allows you to do is it's a library that you can add into WordPress, which allows you to then make forms inside of WordPress that you can use as part of your app or part of your website. So let me show you WordPress quickly, just in case you're not familiar with it. And I do have a development site set up here running on my machine. And I'm just going to go into the admin area of this and kind of point a few things out that will help put this all into some context. So just give me a sec here. Okay, so this is kind of the admin area of WordPress, and I've already gotten started on this Honored Stories plugin. I've done a little bit of work, so I'll start there with adding a new honored story from the admin area. So when I click on this, it'll take me to the primary editing interface that WordPress uses. So this is where, if you have a WordPress site, you can add posts or pages or honored stories in this case. This interface always kind of looks the same. You can enter a title, as you saw there, with the help text, and down here you can put the body of the post. Now what CMB2, this library that I was showing previously, what this allows me to do, and it should say, create and administer meta boxes and forms with custom fields. So that's kind of vague, but to make it a little bit more understandable, to go back to my WordPress tab here, instead of having these default boxes here to interact with, and there are actually, WordPress provides a few more that I've hidden, but CMB2 allows me to create my own boxes. So I can make my own text fields. I can add my own images, like here. You know, I can create these, what in WordPress are called meta boxes, but they're really just UI elements on the back end of the site that allow you to put your custom content in there in a way that works for you. So because WordPress doesn't provide a great native way to recreate this, and in particular this form. So CMB2 is what's going to allow me to create these fields on the server and interact with them as a developer. So I love this project. I've used it a ton of times on a lot of different things. I highly recommend it. You'll see it on here, very popular on GitHub with over 1,000 stars. It's been consistently developed and improved since I've started using it, and I love it. However, this is the first time that I'm using it to create a form that will actually go on the front end of the site. As I was saying before, most of the times when I use CMB2, I'm creating a form that will go in this area, in the admin area. So someone will have to be logged in, usually as an administrator, to be able to interact with what I create with CMB2. However, today I'll be following along with this tutorial by Justin Sternberg. Shout out to him. This is a great tutorial that I've looked at before but never really tried to implement. But what you can do is create a form basically that goes on the front end of your site, but that's managed by CMB2, and you get all of the advantages of using CMB2, like they're thinking about security and efficiency and things like that for you, without having to code the HTML form from scratch and do all the things that normally come with that. So instead of creating a form on the admin area of the site, I want to have a form, I'll show you the front end, effectively on this new site. I want my form to live here where my users can see it. And the goal under here where it says submit and view memorials is to build out a replica of that form I showed you before, so that the customers of Home to Heaven can come here and submit their honored stories for their pets that have passed on. So that's kind of the goal of this, and I won't get this all done today, I guarantee that, but over the next few days and possibly the next couple of weeks, I'll plan to pop on here onto YouTube occasionally and live stream myself building this all out. So I hope that was a good overview of everything, and now I'll actually get into some code here, starting where I always start with a new project, which is with Git. So if you don't know about Git, it's just a way to keep track of the changes in a code base, among other things. It's also very good for collaborating with other developers on a single code base. But the primary way I'll be using it, because I'm working on this project by myself, is to just commit and keep track of all the changes over time to the code. So now that I'm actually getting into coding this thing here, let me go ahead and switch off my camera and you can just see my screen. So one moment here. Okay, so I think that's good. And like I said, this was my first time doing this, so sorry for the kind of rough start here. So Git. So Git, I primarily interact with it through the command line here. And if you're not, familiar with the command line, I'm sorry, I'm not going to go into detail on how this works, but it's basically a way to interact with your operating system by typing. Okay, so you'll notice there's a command that I have called git, G-I-T, and this is the tool I'm talking about I'll be using to track changes. So I just type git, and you have to, I believe this comes pre-installed on Mac, but you may have to install it if you're on a Windows machine. But you'll see I have all these commands that I can use once I have git installed. However, I have to first set up my git project for this particular folder that I'm in. So you can see now that I'm kind of looking at some files on the command line using the list command. And if I just open this in my GUI, I'll kind of show you what we're working with. I mentioned before I did start this plugin previously. So I put it in the plugins folder of my WordPress site, called it Honored Stories. And you'll see I have a PHP file in here, and I also have some other files tucked away in here. So I kind of like to organize my projects this way. And you'll see as we continue to work on this, the number of folders in here in particular will grow. And I try to keep it just that one file in the root directory of my plugin, so that it's very obvious when I come back to this plugin later, or if another developer works on it, where to start out. So this is init.php, short for initialize. It just means that this file is where I'm kicking off everything that I'm doing. But before I do any more work here, I want to show you how to set up a Git repo. I use a system called Bitbucket, and this is just a place to kind of store your work in the cloud and manage Git remotely through a web browser. So I like it primarily for the backup purposes, just so I know that my code is always stored somewhere offsite and not on my machine. In Git lingo, we usually talk about repositories as like a project. So I'm just going to create a new repository today just to show how this is done. I do like Bitbucket because they allow you to do private repositories for free. This is something that's different from GitHub, which is probably the more popular version of the same kind of software. So Honored Stories will be my repository name. I do want to use Git, and then I'll just click Create a Repository. Now, this is very nice because they say whether you're starting from scratch or you have an existing project, you can kind of open up these to do either one of them. So although I have some files in that folder, I am technically starting from scratch. So I'm going to go ahead and use these commands right here. And yeah, I think this will work. Yeah, so now I just copied and pasted those into my command line. And so you'll see one command was git init, which just starts a Git project in the directory. And this remote add origin, which is just telling my Git project that, hey, our remote source is at this sort of address on the web, and this is what it's called. So pretty simple. You can always kind of look at the status of your Git project by typing git status from the command line. And you'll see it'll just tell me, hey, you have a Git project, but we see these files and they're not being tracked. So going back, because I believe these are in the instructions, right? So you want to add, commit, and push. That's the basic workflow. So I'll show you how that goes. If I want to add a file, git add init.php, and I'm going to put a space because I can also include that folder and just keep it on one line. So both of those have now been added to my project. This just means that Git is watching them and tracking them. So now I want to commit them, and this is me saying, hey, take what I've done here so far and save it. Because this is my initial commit, I usually just label it as such. And going back to the command I just typed, you can add a message to your commit with this -m option. So that's all I did there. So git commit -m and then a message. Okay. So sorry, I breezed right through that. And then I'll just do git push because I've already set up the remote. I believe this would work, although it might complain. Okay, yeah, that's correct because I do have to tell it which branch. And I won't elaborate on that. I'm just going to copy and paste it in there. But this is just telling it where in that remote repository I'd like to save it. And so you'll see, because I have my keys already set up, it just works. If you don't have keys or some kind of other authentication set up, you may have to, for example, use your username and password. But I just use SSH, so it's already linked to my Bitbucket account. Okay, so now we have a project ready to rock and roll, and we're ready to track changes on it, which is very important. So what I'm looking at now is my project itself. These are my code files in an editor called Sublime Text. I normally use a code editor called PHP Storm. However, it's resource intensive, and to try to keep the quality of my streaming high, today I'll be using Sublime Text. However, that's not to say Sublime Text isn't good. In fact, it's very, very good. It's just minimalist on purpose, and therefore lacking some of the features that PHP Storm has that I like to use when I'm doing this kind of work. However, for just getting in and editing code files, Sublime is one of the best editors out there that you can use for coding. So this is what I'll be using today. And the first thing I want to do is just show you kind of my Git workflow. So I already know I was messing around here with this code, and I don't want it for now. So like something I would do when I was a beginner developer, I would just come in here and comment all of this stuff out. So you know, I might take a something like this. Yeah, I think this is. So there you go. So I use a block comment here and just grade all this out in effect so that the code isn't considering it. But because I have Git, I can have a little more flexibility to just say, hey, I want to just take this out. I don't need it right now. And then I'll go ahead and save my file, which is Command S. So from now on, I'm not going to go use the mouse to do this. I just try to use the keyboard shortcut whenever possible. So I'm going to save this file and go back to my Git workflow. And now when I do Git status, you'll see it saying, hey, we're tracking, and we notice that you modified your PHP file. What I can do is go ahead and commit that, but making it even better, I have an alias saved so that when I type git a, it actually shows me what the changes were, and I can just kind of do a code review of before I make a commit to my code base. So I'm just making sure here that all of these changes are the ones that I want, and in fact they're not. I took out a little too much. I actually want this line in my code still. So let me go back here, and that's exactly why I do this. So you see, I commented out a little bit too much there. What I really want to take out is that chunk. I do need this part. No, actually, I don't want that part. Excuse me. This is, I guess, the downside of live streaming. This is all good to go, but I do still need this action. And I'll explain what all of these lines do in a second. But let me just go ahead and save that again and try again. So you have a few options here down where it says stage this hunk. What I want to do is press quit. So Q will just take me out of this. Okay, so now git A, and let's see. Yeah, okay. I think I'm all right here. So I do want to stage that, and then I want to commit, and I'm just taking out something I was playing around with before. And I always try to make a good message here. Although I'm not great at it, I think if I saw this later down the road, it would help me jog my memory. Like, oh, that's the change I made here. So git commit -m. Just going to press enter. And okay, looks like it took that, and then git push just to get it up onto Bitbucket, so it's stored on the web. Okay, perfect. So now that's out of the way. Let me kind of explain this file here. This is the base file of a WordPress plugin. And how it works is all PHP files have to have this marking up here. It's a symbol, or I guess a series of symbols, that tells the PHP interpreter that yes, this is a PHP file, and what you expect after this is PHP code. This is important because in a lot of PHP, you'll also see this closing tag here that I just typed, and then after that you may see just some plain HTML like this, and then after that you might see more PHP. So this is just how PHP has worked kind of from the start. It was a templating language that was designed to be used with HTML. So even this is legal PHP. Assuming I have a semicolon. Okay, so what this will do right here is it will output this div, which is an HTML element, with this plain text here, and then PHP will kind of interpret or work out whatever is in between these two opening and closing tags for PHP, and then this would once again be plain text. So that's why we kind of open the file with that PHP tag, just to let the interpreter know that, yeah, this is PHP after this point. And there's a nice little shortcut where you do not have to include this, mandatory, at the end of a file. It's just assumed to be there. So I usually keep that off. And this is our whole PHP file that kicks off this plugin. So right under that opening PHP tag, you'll just see a blob of a comment here that tells WordPress specifically what this plugin is, and kind of gives it some data so that WordPress can use it internally and display it to the admin. So you see here my plugin name is Honored Stories, my version is 1.0, and there's a brief description that says collect, moderate, and publish posts from your customers. Okay, so I'll show you on the WordPress dashboard. If I switch back over to my browser and go back here to my WordPress admin area, if I go to my plugins, you'll see that I have a plugin in here called Honored Stories. And the description is collect, moderate, and publish posts from your customers, version 1.0 by Matt McGivney. Okay, so all of this information, it may be obvious, but it comes right from the top of this plugin file. So if I said this was, if I change this a little bit, assuming I don't crash the site, it should change on this plugins page. Yeah, so see, now it says by M. McGivney instead of Matt. And you know, this is a small subset of the options you have to put here. Like, there are more things, more little indicators. I think you can do like a stable, and you could say like 1.0 is a stable version, for example. It may not be exactly correct, but just to give you an idea. However, this is the minimum set that I like to use. I think this is the core of the information you would want to have, and anything else to me is optional. Notice that this plugin is GPL2 license, which is a good license to use with WordPress. I believe that's still the license of the WordPress project itself. So what this means is this source code is freely available for you all to use and distribute, as long as you honor that agreement that whoever you pass it on to is free to use and distribute the source code as well. So I think that covers the header in good detail. What I'm doing on this next line here is just namespacing this file. This is just a way to prevent naming conflicts. So a little bit past the scope of this session today. But for example, you can see down here that it pops up again because I'm using it to reference a function. Yeah, so I'll just leave it at that. But a useful thing to use that is a fairly recent addition to PHP, but helps clear up a lot of the conflicts that we would have when naming things. Because if I had a plugin that I wrote, such as this Honored Stories plugin, and I had a function called myfunction, but then say Mailgun also has a plugin running on the site, and they write a function called myfunction. Both of those functions with the same name can't exist at the same time. So namespacing is just a way to help alleviate that, as I understand it and as I use it. Okay, the next thing I want to do is just make sure that when someone tries to access this file directly, the system just exits. I try to put this at the top of all of my PHP files because I want to control how they are accessed to prevent security exploits from occurring. So I'm not too smart on that, so I just know this is one of the best practices when developing anything in PHP, is that you just don't want to allow open access to your PHP files. Hopefully your server will protect from some of this too, but this is sort of a last resort, just to make sure that if there is somehow people can access your PHP files, that that they can't actually execute them. Okay, and then really these next two lines are where we start to actually do something useful, which is making the plugin serve its purpose. So the first thing I do here is a require statement, and require once just tells PHP to, hey, go get the file that's loaded or that exists at this path and load it, make it a part of this plugin. And you can see the path here. It's in includes, which is a folder, and then it's a file called custom_post_type.php. So if I go up to includes here, you can see that folder, and then there's a file called custom_post_type.php. So all this line is doing is loading in this entire file, which this is where we can start to really branch out, and a lot of things will start to happen at once. So I'm just going to skip down to the next line in the init file before I actually show you what's in this custom post type file. And we're running a little low on time here. I'm going to go for about 5 more minutes today, and then cut it off. So the next line here is using something called an action. And WordPress actually uses a ton of these actions, and I'll just pull up a reference. And these are the ways that you can take the code that you write and interact with WordPress and what WordPress is doing. So there's a whole reference here, and I just wanted to show, for example, this list is they're all valid actions that you can choose to insert your code into with WordPress. And I believe the way this article is laid out, the ones at the top are loaded first. So every time WordPress gets a request to load a page, it kind of goes down this list of actions. WordPress does a lot of stuff in between each one of these, but these are the points where you can enter with your code and modify what's going on with the system. So just take a look at this. Just read through them. Some important ones are like, if you want to add JavaScript to your page, here's a good hook to do that, or I'm sorry, an action. And these are sometimes also referred to as hooks, but I'll try to keep the right terminology here. The post is where you kind of would interact with a post as it's being generated for a page. A lot of stuff. Getting the sidebar, just all these different things that go into loading a WordPress page. They each have kind of an entry point where you can attach your own code to that point so it gets executed at that point in WordPress's process. And you'll see the footer, more sidebar stuff. Okay, Well, that's enough. So I'll show you how we're using it. If I go back over to Sublime Text, you'll see I'm adding an action, my own action, to the init hook. So let's go back here. Let's find init, see where it is in the process. I imagine it's very early. So here you go. So here's the init hook, and we're typically used by plugins to initialize. Great, that's exactly what I want to do because I'm in my init.php. So I think we're so far so good. And it just says note, kind of the user is already authenticated by this time. Well, that's good. We're not using that. Actually, we are, but not too worried about that. Okay, so now the second parameter to this add action function is a function name as a string. So I'll just comment this out. So we have add action, and we're using it like this. I'll use a $sign to kind of represent the name or the kind of type of thing we're doing. So this is an action name. So you see we're using init in this case. And then the second parameter is a function name. Okay, and the third, I don't remember off the top of my head. So let's look it up just for the sake of completeness. And I'm definitely one who likes to search a lot while I'm developing. I don't memorize all of this stuff. I would never pretend that I do. So let's just make sure I'm telling you what that third parameter is. Yeah, so I don't think it matters. So I'm going to actually take that out. So don't worry about that. This sort of format that we're using here, I think, is all that's required. And everything else would just use the defaults. So we have add action with an action name and a function name. Now maybe you're saying to yourself, where is this function? If this is a function name, where is this located? Well, you notice here that we required this file first, and this register function is actually located in this custom post type PHP file. So let's go ahead and take a look at that briefly, and then I'll, after a quick glance at that file, I will stop the live stream for today. I just wanted to see how this turned out before I continue along with it. For all I know, my audio isn't even working, for example. So I'll probably cut it off after this and go again tomorrow around the same time if you're interested. So lost myself. Okay. So once again, we're looking at this custom post type PHP that's in my includes folder. So under includes, you can see up here, loading this PHP file. And whoa, have quite a bit of stuff. But one of the first things you'll notice is that I'm using this namespace again, which we can just kind of skip over. And then there's a function called register. So if I go ahead and split my screen, and I'll put my initializer here on the left, and I'll put this new file on the right, you can see that this register function is declared here in this file. So I load my custom post type into memory, and then I reference this function, perfectly legal. So another way to look at this, I'll keep the namespace out, but for the sake of argument, I don't need this file. If I take out this require statement, it's the same thing if I just had that code right there. So, but you can see already that my nice initialization file is suddenly becoming kind of messy and kind of long, right? I don't like that. I like especially my entry point, my init.php, I like it to be clean. So rather than doing this, which would work perfectly fine, except for some namespacing issues, but I would rather keep my entry file nice and clean and just call or reference another PHP file that has all that junk in it. So I'm going to save everything and just make sure I didn't break anything at this point. If any of you are watching and you notice that I made a mistake, you can always drop it here in the chat, but I don't see any chats in there. So, all right. So anyway, yeah. So everything looks good still, but I'm one of those that I'll believe it when I see it. So often if I were to make a mistake, just trying to load this dashboard area in WordPress, if I make a mistake in my PHP, it will let me know via some kind of error. Not always. There are different kinds of errors, but if I were to make an obvious syntax error, like you may have noticed or you may already know that PHP require these semicolons. So say I forgot to add one of those. So I'm just going to delete it and save this file. When I try to load this page, it should complain. Yeah, see? And it usually is pretty good about actually telling you what's going on. And right here it's saying unexpected end of file, because as far as PHP is concerned, this is not a complete statement without that semicolon. So, most of the time when I'm coding, you'll know pretty quickly when you make a mistake like that, because the interpreter will tell you and you'll get errors from the server. All right, but all this looks good. I'm gonna just kind of squeeze all this stuff over here so we can look at this register post type business here. So WordPress. Okay, let's talk about WordPress for a sec. It uses posts. WordPress was initially created as a blogging platform, so post types were the first thing that were around when WordPress started, and that's like a terrible way of describing it, but just to give you a visual, WordPress started with posts. It was blogging from the start, and you could add a new post, and you'll see this post form looks a lot like that Honored Stories form I showed you, and there's a reason for that. The reason for that is that Honored Stories here, it's really just a post type. So it uses a lot of the same code that these blog posts uses, but WordPress allows you to register your own. So instead of using posts and finding some way to hack them into working the way I want, I just created my own called Honored Stories. And I might have one. Yeah, I have one on here that I was testing with. But when I go to add a new Honored Stories post, it just looks like a post. It just has these different labels. So instead of saying add new post, it says add new Honored Story. Or instead of saying, posts over here, it says Honored Stories. It's like pretty obvious. Instead of all posts, here under Honored Stories, we have all Honored Stories. And this is very easy to set up in WordPress. It's great for my clients because they don't always come to me with a lot of technical skills. And so I wanted to make things as easy as possible for them. So for the staff at Home to Heaven, this is great because they know now when they need to come in and moderate an Honored Story, it's very easy for them to find here in the admin area. And that's kind of the power of, or one of the powers of these custom post types. And all of that is created here in this, 55 lines of code. So you notice that this function register that gets called from over here, like we discussed, makes an array of labels. All of these labels, or all of these array items, have a meaning to WordPress. And where you can find these is back in this WordPress codex, where you can just look for, like, I can normally use Google and find this much more quickly, so I hope this doesn't blow up in my face. But yeah, so here we go. Here's their help article, which this is a great place to start if you want to create your own post type. It will actually tell you, I believe it will tell you somewhere in this page. Anyway, it's pretty easy to track down like what all of these mean. Some of them are obvious, like name, Honored Stories, maps to, if I could go back to my WordPress tab, maps to here, and all of these kind of, like pet image for my featured image is where we get this stuff, where I can go into my library and pick an image for the pet. Like if I wanted to use this one, and I could set the pet image. You see how that label was custom? Remove pet image. Like all of that stuff comes directly from this file. And I actually created this from a project that I also like and should give a shout out to. And the name sometimes escapes me, but it's very good for doing this sort of stuff. Yeah, Generate WP. So Generate WP allows you, if you have kind of a high-level idea of the code you want to write for WordPress, instead of me having to write all of this by hand every time, which gets very tedious because it's often the same uh, and very time-consuming and kind of boring to do, you can just come to this site, which is great, and use their post type generator. And instead of typing all of this stuff, you just come in and kind of go through these tabs and you fill in these fields, right? So like for this one, I put honored underscore stories, you know, something like this. And then you just hit update, you know, after filling out all these forms, some of which are optional. And then it'll kind of spit out the code you need. So I actually got this directly from Generate WP. So thanks to them for the awesome service. All right, so it's showing, Sublime Text is showing me I've changed this file, but I didn't mean to. So let me just undo. Okay, good. So now we're back to normal. Okay, so all of these labels and then all of these arguments are things that WordPress kind of knows what to do with. So I set these all, kind of considering them one at a time and going down the list, but I'm not going to go line by line through this file right now. The most important thing on this page, after you set all of this up, is just registering this post type. So you can see here, this is calling another function that exists inside of WordPress called register post type, and it's taking all of these arguments and all of this stuff that I did, giving it a name. So to use our little thing that we did before, register post type takes in a we'll call it a post type name, which is kind of confusing, but it's just like how you want to refer to your post type in the system. And then it takes in args, which is obvious there. Where do these args come from? Easy. They come from here. All right, so, and args in turn uses a variable called labels. And where did labels come from? Well, it came from here. So this is kind of the bare minimum I like to use to set up a custom post type. And so just these few lines of code and these couple of files, basically everything you see right here gives us all of this that I keep showing you for effectively free. It's kind of layering itself on top of the existing WordPress functions. And you'll see here I've already created a test post or an honored story for my dog Jack. I can add his picture, I can add a little caption, and then I believe, ooh, that might not work, so I'm not going to do it. It gives me a URL to where this is published, you know, of course, once I publish it. We get all of that stuff just from this, what is it, maybe 70 lines of code total or something. So this is what I like about developing for WordPress, is you get a lot of this world-class sort of admin UI that you can pass on to your clients or to your users. You get it all for free if you just kind of do things the right way with WordPress. So, man, we didn't get very far today. Definitely going to start on this form by going through Justin's post. We'll start on that tomorrow. What I'll try to do is, after this video gets saved and archived on YouTube, I'll go in and add in some of these links so you can feel free to proceed on your own if you want, if this is something that's interesting to you. But otherwise, I will see you all back here tomorrow, and thanks for watching.